Canada has now slipped from 8th in the world in vaccinations per capita on January 8th to 34th today. Not the kind of pandemic progress you want to see. Let's follow up with three members of Parliament to talk about the latest vaccine development. Steve McKinnon is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Procurement. Michael Barrett is the ethics critic for the official opposition Conservatives. And Don Davies is the health critic for the NDP. Mr. McKinnon, more news today about the uncertainty of vaccine supply. Fewer doses of Moderna this month, probably next, but we don't know how many less. And the company isn't saying why it's cutting Canada's doses. Provinces running out of vaccine and can't plan their rollouts. What's happening to the plan here?
Well, good evening, Peter, and good evening to my colleagues. Thank you for having me on. Canada has, in fact, adopted a strategy, a very diverse strategy of vaccine procurement, one that will ultimately stand us in very, very good stead. Every Canadian who wishes to access a vaccine will be able to do so before September. Of course, Pfizer and Moderna have both under the crushing weight of world demand until we ramp up so that supply meets demand and this crushing demand for vaccine. Of course, they will encounter speed bumps as they ramp up their production. That's what we're experiencing now, not just Canada, but other countries. The customers of Moderna have all taken an equal reduction, a small one in the first week of February. Those shipments come every 3 weeks, so we're awaiting word, and we're obviously hoping that reduction will be as small as possible in the second February delivery to Canada. And we're watching that closely. As you can imagine, we're in daily contact with the company.
Mr. Barrett, the Minister of Procurement explained today that none of Canada's vaccine contracts specified weekly or monthly amounts because they were negotiated even before there was a vaccine on the horizon. So they stuck to quarterly guarantees. And that explains perhaps why we have no say over weekly doses or the every 3 week doses we get from Moderna. What's your reaction to that explanation about, why we might be seeing reductions in doses and really can't hold the companies over the barrel because of it?
Well, what we're seeing is that the Liberals didn't have a plan when they signed these contracts. So it seems as though they signed whatever was put in front of them. And that leaves Canada at a greatly disadvantaged position, certainly well behind our allies. And every day that we fall behind in receiving these vaccines, Canadians don't get to see their loved ones. Their health isn't protected, and people's livelihoods are dramatically affected as lockdowns continue as a result. And so the contracts haven't been made available for members of Parliament to review. And our allies, the United Kingdom, for example, when they were in the same position as we were with domestic production capacity in 10 months ago, they ramped up, scaled up, and now they're manufacturing their own vaccines.
All right,
we're in a position. We're in a position now that is entirely of the making, of this government, and they need to be transparent with Canadians about how we got here, and they need to work with all parties so that we chart a clear path going forward.
Mr. Davies, we're having these regular conversations now about reductions in doses and surprises from the vaccine makers. What is happening?
It's funny, Steve, and by extension the government are starting to remind me of the Black Knight sketch from the old Monty Python movie, where it doesn't matter that the battle just gets progressively worse and worse. They just keep saying everything is going great. The truth is it's not. In every major metric, things are not going well. And I was at the industry committee this morning and put questions to Minister Anand and Minister Champagne and got some very disturbing answers. Like, now we find out that Canada did try to get the ability to produce AstraZeneca vaccines in Canada, and AstraZeneca refused, even though they gave that right to 15 other countries. It turns out that Canada, unlike the EU, the US, and Brazil, we agreed to complete confidentiality clauses in our contracts, whereas those countries or jurisdictions were able to release their contracts. It just seems like the agreements have been fairly poorly negotiated, or certainly relatively speaking, not as well negotiated as other countries. And I think the delivery problems are a sign of that. Just today or yesterday, we found out that we're actually having to get vaccine doses from the COVAX Global Fund meant for poor countries even though this government says we have enough from
Right.
Pfizer and Moderna to vaccinate everybody by September,
Let me
it
pick,
doesn't add up.
let me
It just
pick up.
doesn't.
Let me pick up on what you heard today at the committee. I was also watching along and saw you there, Mr. McKinnon. We learned today from the Minister of Procurement that every one of the vaccine makers, Mr. Davies touched on it, that Canada signed a contract with. They were asked if they could make their vaccines in Canada, and all of them said no. But they said it was because manufacturing capacity was so limited, it wouldn't justify the investment here. How big an indictment is that of Canada's level of preparation for something like a pandemic?
Well, you can imagine, Mr. Van Dusen, that I take issue with virtually everything my colleagues have said to date. And what I would say about manufacturing is that indeed, I don't think it's a secret, A, that we would have pressed every possible vaccine manufacturer that could to assess our ability to make these vaccines. Unfortunately, none of them panned out, and that is because it's also not a secret that Canada allowed, through a variety of circumstances, not pointing fingers, but over time allowed our biomanufacturing capability to erode such that companies like AstraZeneca decided that they could scale up more quickly in different countries. So what Canada did is make sure that our contracts got vaccines to Canada as quickly as possible, and that's the strategy that we adopted. We adopted it very successfully with 7 manufacturers, and of course 5 of them have published encouraging, safe, and efficacious data, such that Canada will have enough vaccines to vaccinate its citizens by September.
So, Mr. Barrett, your party's been pushing for those answers about, why didn't Canada get those vaccines, have the vaccine makers make those vaccines here, as is being done in other countries. It seems like we got the answer today. They wouldn't make them here because Canada couldn't make them. We don't have the manufacturing capacity. Do you accept that as one of the reasons we have the problem we have today?
Well, it sounds like a failure to negotiate on the part of the Liberals. And, at the time...
Well, how can you force them to make the vaccine here if they say, look, we looked at your manufacturing capability here. You can't do it. It's not worth investing in it for us.
Well, the question is, what did the government offer in response? Did they offer to create the capacity to do that, as some other countries did? What our government focused on instead of focusing on domestic production was they partnered with China in that failed deal with CanSino. And we're seeing the results of that now. And so while our allies, they made the investments and they took the necessary steps, this government failed to get the deal done. So, and as Mr. Davies said, this isn't a one-off that just one other country was able to produce it. We stand alone, in this respect, and it is in full part a failure of this government to properly negotiate those contracts. And I think they knew that, and that's why they wanted to keep them a secret.
All right, Mr. Davies, let me have you weigh in on that part of our conversation. You touched on it. You started it. Let's go back there. Was that a missed opportunity when those vaccine companies said, look, you don't have the manufacturing capability, or as Mr. Barrett says, should the answer have been, look, we'll get on it right away. What do we need to do to make it happen?
Yeah, I think the story is actually a little bit darker than Steve may admit. I think we did have the capacity to produce the AstraZeneca vaccine. The problem was the NRC facility that would have had that capacity was tied up with the Chinese firm. And so that's why we didn't have capacity. So I think you can lay that at the Liberal government's feet. But look, there's a structural problem here that goes back decades. How is it that Canada in 2021 is behind countries like Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Belgium? These are the countries that AstraZeneca did sign manufacturing agreements with. And frankly, that I think is an indictment of successive Conservative and Liberal governments who have failed to ensure that we have strong domestic production capacities in essential medicines and vaccines. And it goes right back to 1986 when the Conservatives privatized Connaught Labs. Okay. Which was very, very effective for us. And frankly, the Liberals, who were in power for 19 years after that, 13 in majority government, 7 terms, never lifted a finger to address it. So I think it's where we're at, and we can never be in this position again. We got to get domestic production capacity back in this country.
I think everybody agrees on that. And thank you all for your time tonight, gentlemen. It's running short on us, but I appreciate you taking the time to talk about this important subject. And I bet we'll get a chance to talk about it again. But thank you all tonight. Take care.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.